The dying Fleet Admiral Kexthara stood motionless on the bridge of the VSD Eternal Glory, her 4 arms clasped behind her back as she watched the tactical display with growing dread. The holographic representation showed 47 ships of the Vortanian Starfleet, each one flickering between operational and critical status like dying stars in the void. Her silver skin, normally bright with confidence, had dulled to the color of tarnished metal. The quantum resonance drives that powered their civilization's greatest achievement were failing, one by one, across the entire fleet. 3 days ago, they had been the pride of the Galactic Federation, patrolling the outer rim with technology so advanced that most species could barely comprehend its workings. Now they drifted helplessly in space, their sophisticated systems turning into elaborate monuments to their own technological hubris. Chief Science Officer Zelenak approached with measured steps, his tall frame bent slightly forward in the traditional posture of delivering unwelcome news. His luminescent eyes, usually bright with intellectual curiosity, were dim with exhaustion. "Admiral," he began, his voice carrying the weight of 3 sleepless days, "our latest calibration attempt has failed. The quantum resonance chambers continue to destabilize at an exponential rate." Kexthara turned slowly, her ancient eyes reflecting centuries of military experience. At 347 standard years old, she had commanded fleets through 7 major conflicts, each victory earned through superior Vortanian technology and strategic brilliance. Never before had she faced an enemy she could not understand or defeat. Time remaining before complete system failure? She asked. 18 hours, perhaps 20 if we reduce life support to minimal levels, Zelenak replied. But Admiral, there may be another option. He hesitated, his skin patterns shifting to deep purple, indicating extreme discomfort with what he was about to suggest. The Admiral raised one of her 4 hands, encouraging him to continue. "The Galactic Federation has responded to our distress. Signal. They're sending assistance." Zelenak paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. From Earth. A silence fell across the bridge that seemed to compress the very air around them. The bridge crew, all elite Vortanians with lifespans measured in centuries and intellects that had mastered technologies beyond the comprehension of most species, exchanged glances of barely concealed horror. Earth, the primitive world whose inhabitants had only achieved interstellar flight 3 centuries ago, whose technology still relied on crude chemical reactions and basic electromagnetic principles. Communications Officer Thaylara spoke up from her station, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Admiral, the human vessel just dropped out of hyperspace. They're requesting permission to come aboard." Kexthara closed all 4 of her eyes for a moment. She had dedicated her life to the superiority of Vortanian civilization, to the belief that their advanced quantum technologies made them the natural leaders of the galaxy. To accept help from humans felt like admitting that everything she had fought for was meaningless. But the alternative was watching 50,000 crew members die in the cold vacuum of space. "Grant them permission," she said finally, "but maintain full protocol. They are guests, not saviors." An hour later, the human shuttle docked with the Eternal Glory. Admiral Kexthara waited in the docking bay, flanked by her senior officers, all standing in perfect formation despite their circumstances. The airlock hissed open, and 2 figures emerged that seemed almost absurdly small compared to the towering Vortanians. The first was a woman, perhaps in her early 40s by human standards, with shoulder-length brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore a simple blue jumpsuit with Terran Deep Space Rescue Corps emblazoned across the chest and carried a worn toolkit that looked like it had seen decades of use. Her dark eyes swept the docking bay with the methodical gaze of someone accustomed to assessing problems quickly and efficiently. Behind her came a younger man, barely out of his 20s, with nervous energy radiating from every movement. His jumpsuit was identical, but newer, and he carried additional equipment that looked crude and bulky compared to Vortanian technology. "Admiral Kexthara," the woman said, stepping forward with confident strides. "I'm Captain Sarah Chun, Terran. Deep Space Rescue Corps. This is Lieutenant Marcus Torres, my technical assistant. We're here to help with your quantum drive problems." Kexthara studied the human captain with undisguised skepticism. Sarah Chun was shorter than even the smallest Vortanian. Her technology appeared primitive, and her species had been exploring space for less time than Kexthara had been alive. Yet there was something in her bearing, a quiet confidence that suggested she had faced impossible situations before and emerged victorious. "Captain Chun," Kexthara replied with formal courtesy, "while we appreciate the Federation's concern, I'm not certain your people possess the technical knowledge necessary to address quantum resonance field dynamics. Our systems operate on principles that took our civilization millennia to develop." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been amusement. "With respect, Admiral, I've been fixing broken machines for 20 years. Sometimes the most advanced systems fail for the most basic reasons. Mind if we take a look?" Chief Science Officer Zelenok stepped forward, his skin patterns shifting to the bright orange of barely controlled irritation. "Captain, our quantum resonance drives manipulate fundamental forces at the subatomic level. They require understanding of 11-dimensional mathematics and the ability to process calculations involving 17 different forms of exotic matter. No offense intended, but human technology still relies primarily on controlled combustion and electromagnetic fields." Lieutenant Torres bristled visibly at the condescension, but Sarah placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "None taken," she said mildly. "You're right that we don't understand your technology the way you do. But sometimes an outside perspective can see problems that experts miss. What exactly is happening with your drives?" Zelenok exchanged a glance with Admiral Kexthara, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "The quantum resonance chambers are experiencing cascade failures," he explained. "The exotic matter containment fields destabilize, causing the entire propulsion matrix to collapse. We've attempted 17 different recalibration procedures, all unsuccessful." Sarah listened intently, asking occasional questions that revealed a practical understanding of engineering principles that surprised the Vortanians. When Zelenok finished his explanation, she was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "I'd like to see one of the failed drives," she said finally. "And I'll need to examine your power distribution systems and structural integrity readings for the past week." Admiral Kexthara led them through corridors that seemed designed to overwhelm visitors with their grandeur. Crystalline walls pulsed with inner light. Holographic displays showed incomprehensible equations floating in mid-air, and the very architecture seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could fully process. Sarah walked through it all, with professional focus, taking notes on a simple paper notebook that looked almost comically primitive in the advanced surroundings. Asterisk. The quantum drive chamber was a cathedral of technology. Towering structures of metallic crystal reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows, connected by flowing tubes of liquid light that pulsed with energies that could power entire star systems. At the center sat the quantum resonance core, a sphere of perfect blackness surrounded by rings of exotic matter that moved in patterns, too complex for human minds to fully comprehend. "Beautiful," Sarah said quietly, and something in her tone made Admiral Kexthara look at her with new attention. "Truly beautiful. Your engineers are artists as much as scientists." The unexpected compliment seemed to surprise Zelenok. "You appreciate the aesthetic principles?" "I appreciate good work when I see it," Sarah replied, approaching the dead resonance core with careful steps. "This level of engineering represents generations of brilliant minds working together." That's why whatever's causing the failures has to be something fundamental, something so basic that your experts wouldn't think to look for it. She knelt beside one of the power conduits, pulling a simple magnetic scanner from her toolkit. The device looked like a child's toy compared to the sophisticated diagnostic equipment the Vortanians had been using, but Sarah wielded it with the confidence of long experience. Lieutenant Torres unpacked additional equipment, setting up sensors and analyzers that were crude but functional. "Captain," he said after several minutes of readings, "I'm getting some weird resonance patterns in the structural supports. Almost like ... double quotes, like a harmonic interference," Sarah finished. She stood, dusting off her knees, and looked up at the towering crystal formations that formed the chamber's architecture. "Admiral, when did you last perform structural analysis?" "On your ships? Structural analysis?" Admiral Kexthara's confusion was evident. "Our ships are grown from living crystal, not constructed. They adapt and strengthen themselves continuously. Structural failure is essentially impossible." Sarah pulled out a small device that looked like nothing more than a tuning fork attached to a simple electronic reader. She struck it against one of the crystal pillars, and a clear, pure tone rang through the chamber. The electronic reader showed a waveform that fluctuated wildly before settling into an irregular pattern. "There's your problem," she said, showing the reading to Zelenak. "Your crystal structures are resonating at multiple frequencies simultaneously. The quantum drives operate by maintaining precise harmonic relationships, but the structural crystals are introducing interference patterns that cascade through the entire system." Zelenak stared at the simple readout, his luminescent eyes widening with realization. "But that's impossible. Living crystal naturally maintains harmonic stability. It's a fundamental property of the material." Sarah struck her tuning fork against several more pillars, each time getting the same chaotic resonance pattern. "Something's changed in the crystal structure. Something recent." She turned to Admiral Kexthara. "Have you encountered any unusual radiation sources lately? Passed through any asteroid fields with high mineral content? Even changes in your ship's environment can alter crystalline growth patterns over time." The Admiral's 4 eyes met simultaneously. As understanding dawned, "The Corvex Nebula," she said slowly. "We passed through it 6 days ago during our patrol route. The region is known for unusual quantum fluctuations, but our shields were maintained at full strength." "Shields protect against direct radiation," Sarah said, "but quantum fluctuations can alter matter at the subatomic level. If your living crystal absorbed even trace amounts of exotic particles from the nebula, it could have changed the harmonic properties gradually." Chief Science Officer Zelenak was already pulling up holographic displays, running calculations with desperate speed. If the crystal resonance frequencies have shifted even by fractions of a percent, it would create interference patterns throughout the quantum matrix. The cascade failures we've been experiencing would be inevitable. "Can it be fixed?" Admiral Kexthara asked, and for the first time since the crisis began, there was hope in her voice. Sarah was already examining her toolkit, pulling out items that looked impossibly simple compared to the advanced technology surrounding them. "Maybe," she said, "but not with quantum field manipulators or exotic matter recalibrators. We need to get back to basics." She held up a coil of simple copper wire, the kind that might be found in any human electrical system. In the crystal cathedral of Vortanian technology, it looked like a relic from the Stone Age. "Sometimes," Sarah said with a slight smile, "the most advanced problems have the most primitive solutions." Asterisk, the simple solution. The copper wire gleamed dully in the pulsing light of the quantum drive chamber, looking completely out of place among the flowing streams of exotic matter and crystalline structures that defied conventional physics. "Admiral." Kexthara stared at it with the expression of someone trying to understand how a stone knife might be used to repair a starship. Copper, she said slowly, as if the word itself was foreign to her. You propose to repair our quantum resonance. Drives with ... copper. Sarah Chun nodded, already calculating distances and angles as she studied the chamber's architecture. Not repair, exactly. Dampen. Your crystal structures are vibrating at multiple conflicting frequencies because of the quantum contamination from the Corvex Nebula. We need to create harmonic dampening fields to stabilize the resonance patterns. Chief. Science Officer Zelenok's skin patterns had shifted to deep purple, the Vortanian equivalent of profound skepticism mixed with barely controlled panic. Captain Chun, copper is one of the most primitive conductive materials in the known galaxy. Our quantum systems operate beyond anything that simple metallic conductors could possibly influence. That's exactly why it might work, Lieutenant. Torres interjected, earning sharp looks from the Vortanian officers. The young human's nervousness was obvious, but his voice carried conviction. Captain Chun taught me that sometimes you need to think outside the complexity. Your quantum systems are so advanced that they don't account for simple physical harmonics. Sarah was already moving, her practiced hands uncoiling the copper wire as she walked among the towering crystal pillars. The quantum contamination altered your crystals at the molecular level, but the changes follow basic harmonic principles. Copper wire, properly positioned, can create electromagnetic fields that interfere with the chaotic resonance patterns. It won't restore your crystals to their original state, but it will stabilize them enough for your quantum drives to function. She stopped beside one of the main support pillars and pressed her ear against it, listening intently. The crystal was completely silent to Vortanian hearing, but Sarah nodded as if she had heard exactly what she expected. This pillar is the primary resonance node for this section, she explained, beginning to wind copper wire around its base in a precise spiral pattern. The contaminated crystal is vibrating at approximately 2.7 terahertz, which creates interference with your quantum field generators. If I can create a counter-resonance at exactly half that frequency, you'll establish a harmonic dampening field, Zelenok finished, his scientific mind grasping the principle despite his disbelief at the primitive method. But the calculations required to determine the precise positioning and electromagnetic field strength. Sarah looked up from her work with a slight smile. I don't need calculations. I can feel it. She struck her tuning fork against the crystal again, and the chaotic waveform on her simple electronic reader had already begun to stabilize. 20 years of fixing machines teaches you to listen to what they're telling you. Admiral Kexthara watched the human captain work with growing fascination. Sarah moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades solving problems that others considered impossible. Her movements were economical and precise, each action serving a specific purpose in a plan that existed entirely in her experienced mind. Admiral, Communications Officer Thale Ara's voice cut through the chamber with barely controlled urgency. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple contacts approaching our position. Krolex raiders, at least 12 vessels, moving at maximum sublight speed. The blood-colored lights that indicated battle stations began flashing throughout the ship, and Admiral Kexthara felt the familiar weight of command settle across her shoulders. The Krolex were pirates and scavengers who specialized in attacking disabled vessels, stripping them of technology and leaving the crews to die in the void. Under normal circumstances, a single Vortanian warship could destroy an entire Krolex fleet. But with their quantum drives offline, the Starfleet was helpless. Time to contact? She asked. 4 hours, 17 minutes at their current velocity. Sarah looked up from her work, copper wire still in her hands. How long until your drives fail completely? Zelenok consulted his instruments. 3 hours, 42 minutes. But even if we could restore propulsion, it would take nearly an hour to. Bring the quantum drives online safely. Then we don't have time to do this the safe way, Sarah said, her expression hardening with determination. Lieutenant Torres, start running wire to the other primary resonance nodes. Use the same spiral pattern I'm using here, but adjust the frequency dampening for each pillar's specific harmonic signature. Captain, Torres said, uncertainty creeping into his voice, if we get the frequencies wrong, the quantum matrix could destabilize catastrophically, Zelenak finished. The resulting explosion would vaporize this entire section of the ship. Sarah continued working, her movements never slowing despite the massive stakes. Then we'd better get the frequencies right. Admiral, I need every available crew member who can follow precise instructions. We have to install dampening fields throughout all 47 ships simultaneously, or the quantum resonance cascade will just shift to the ships we haven't treated. Admiral Kexthara was already activating her communication systems. All ships. Priority 1. Stand by for emergency technical instructions. She paused, looking directly at Sarah. Captain Shun, I am placing the lives of 50,000 Vortanian crew members in your hands, based on a theory involving primitive copper wire and harmonic dampening fields that my science officers consider impossible. I know, Sarah replied, without looking up from her work. No pressure at all. The next 3 hours transformed into a desperate race against time that stretched across 47 ships and involved thousands of crew members, following instructions they couldn't fully understand. Sarah's voice echoed through communication channels as she directed the massive operation, explaining harmonic theory in terms simple, enough for non-engineers to follow while simultaneously calculating frequencies and field positions in her head. Lieutenant Torres had overcome his initial nervousness and was moving through the fleet like a man possessed, checking installations and making adjustments with growing confidence. The Vortanian crew members, despite their initial skepticism, began working with the focused intensity of beings who understood that their lives depended on following the humans' instructions precisely. Wire placement confirmed on Ship 17. Through 24, reported Chief Engineering Officer Korvax from his position on the VSD luminous blade. Resonance dampening fields are showing initial stability, but the quantum matrix integration is still erratic. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of grease from her hands. That's normal. The fields need time to stabilize. The crystal structures before the quantum drives can safely interface. Keep monitoring the harmonic readings and make fine adjustments as needed. Admiral Kexthara studied the tactical display showing the approaching Krolex fleet. 2 hours. 37 minutes to enemy contact. Captain Shun, even if your solution works, we won't have time to bring all drives online before they arrive. We don't need all of them, Sarah replied, making final adjustments to the wire placement around the primary resonance node. Just enough to get the fleet moving. Once we're underway, the remaining drives can be brought online gradually. She activated her simple electronic reader and struck the tuning fork against the crystal pillar one final time. The waveform that appeared was clean and stable, showing the single, clear frequency that indicated proper harmonic resonance. Primary node stabilized, she announced. Beginning quantum field integration sequence. Throughout the chamber, the flowing streams of exotic matter began to pulse with renewed energy. The perfect black sphere of the quantum resonance core flickered, then blazed to life with controlled nuclear fire. For the first time in 3 days, the Eternal Glory's quantum drive was operational. Impossible, Zelenak whispered, staring at his instruments in disbelief. The quantum field coherence is perfect, better than our original specifications. Similar reports came in from across the fleet as ship after ship reported successful drive restoration. The copper wire that had seemed so primitive and inadequate was performing exactly as Sarah had predicted. creating stable electromagnetic fields that dampen the chaotic resonances in the contaminated crystals. Fleet status report, Admiral. Kexthara commanded. 31 ships report full quantum drive capability, Thelara announced. 12 more are showing partial functionality and continuing to improve. 4 ships still offline, but responding to the dampening fields. Krolek's fleet will be within weapons range in 47 minutes, the tactical officer reported. Admiral Kexthara stood at the center of a bridge, feeling the familiar throb of quantum drives powering up throughout her fleet. The sensation was like awakening from a nightmare to find that the world still made sense. All ships, prepare for immediate departure. Set course for the Altarian defense perimeter, maximum quantum velocity. She turned to Sarah, who was packing her simple tools back into their worn case. Captain Shun, there are no words in any language I know that can adequately express my gratitude. You have saved not only this fleet, but preserved the honor of the Vortanian Empire. Sarah looked up from her toolkit with a tired smile. Just doing my job, Admiral. Though I have to admit, your quantum technology is the most elegant system I've ever worked with. Once we got the harmonics stabilized, it practically fixed itself. The Galactic Federation will hear of this, Admiral Kexthara declared formally. The Vortanian Empire officially recognizes humanity as our technological equals, and I personally request that Captain Sarah Chun be awarded the Star of Valor, the highest honor our civilization can bestow upon a non-Vortanian. Lieutenant Torres grinned widely. Wait until they hear about this back on Earth. The brass never believed that old-school engineering could compete with advanced alien technology. Chief Science Officer Zelenok approached Sarah with the hesitant manner of someone preparing to admit a fundamental error in judgment. Captain, I owe you an apology. I allowed my prejudice regarding human technological development to blind me to the elegance of your solution. Your understanding of harmonic principles is ... extraordinary. You don't need to apologize, Sarah replied, shouldering her toolkit. You were protecting your people and your technology the best way you knew. How? That's what good officers do. The tactical display showed the Vortanian fleet accelerating smoothly away from the approaching Krolek's raiders, quantum drives functioning perfectly, despite their unconventional repair. In the engine rooms throughout the fleet, simple copper wire continued to wind around crystal pillars, creating electromagnetic fields that proved once again that the most complex problems sometimes had the most elegant solutions. Admiral, Communications Officer Thelara reported, the Krolek's fleet is breaking off pursuit. They're returning to whatever hole they crawled out of. Admiral Kexthara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before turning back to Sarah. Captain Chun, the Vortanian Empire would be honored to establish a formal technology exchange program with Earth. I believe our civilizations have much to teach each other. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I think that's an excellent idea, Admiral. Though you might want to make sure your engineers are prepared to think outside their comfort zones. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that seem impossible at first. Glance. As the human shuttle prepared to depart, carrying Sarah and Lieutenant Torres back to their own ship, Admiral Kexthara stood in the docking bay, reflecting on the events of the past few hours. A human engineer with simple tools and practical wisdom had accomplished what the most advanced scientific minds in the Vortanian Empire could not. It was a humbling lesson in the value of perspective, creativity, and the kind of problem-solving, ingenuity that comes from a lifetime of making broken things work again. The copper wire would remain in place throughout the fleet, a permanent reminder that advancement and complexity were not always the same thing, and that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs came from the most unexpected sources. Asterisk.